Welcome back to Beta. So, we've already addressed two of the top questions people said in a survey in USA Today they would ask a God or supreme being if they could get a direct and immediate answer. But we want to look at the third question tonight, which is also the number one question that people who attend our Alpha course ask. And that is this: why does God allow suffering and evil? Now, that's a huge question. And actually, in some ways, it is a special objection in the Christian faith. Because some people, their belief system is that there is no good God. And if you don't have a benevolent God at the center of your faith, then this isn't really a problem. Suffering just is. For Buddhism, suffering is not a problem at all. But for Christianity, it is a special problem because we say God is all-powerful and we say God is good. That makes suffering and evil a special problem for us. In Ecclesiastes 8:14, we see this problem described this way. The author says, "There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. Righteous men who get what the wicked deserve, and wicked men who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless." That is a special problem. And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that life is far from fair? I've heard so many stories in my counseling and soul care of people that were molested as children and have gone through unspeakable pain. And I can do nothing but weep when I hear stories like that. I can't explain those kinds of stories. And they are a special problem for even me, as I realize how loving God is and yet how much evil He tolerates in the world in which we live. C.S. Lewis said it this way: if God were good, He would wish to make His creatures happy. And if God were almighty, He would be able to do what He wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either goodness or power or both. Now, that's our problem. When we look at mass shootings, when we look at the loss of a child and broken marriages, forced terminations, all kinds of injustice, it makes us wonder, why does God allow such incredible suffering? The first thing I want to share tonight is this: it really matters how we answer this question, the way in which we answer this question. In fact, I would say it this way: the spirit of our answer is even more important than our answer. I've noticed that sometimes people of faith are really quick to answer this. They just jump in and start giving pat answers. And the problem with that is no one is really asking the question, why do people out there suffer? They're really asking, why do I suffer? And when you give a pat answer without listening to someone's heart, you really miss the core question. So I want you to just not give an answer to begin with. I want you to stop, and I want you to look the person in the eye, and I want you to say with compassion, hey, what's your story? Because when people have asked this with anger in their voice, and as a professor for years at Pima Community College, I would often ask students, hey, what was your story? Those same students would be weeping a few moments later as they describe the death of someone they love in their family and the way they died and how they watched them die. And I realized they're not asking some kind of philosophical question. They're wanting to know, why did God allow that to happen to me? Why didn't God care enough to protect someone I love from that? That's the real question. So keep in mind, this is a really personal question, even if it sounds philosophical. Don't give quick answers. Ask questions like, what happened? Listen to the person. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what they've suffered, but they've gone through something. When I gave this talk years ago, I put it up on Facebook that I was giving this talk. And a girl I dated back in high school named Mary responded, and she gave me this private email. I asked her if I could share this, and she gave me permission. This is what she wrote: I can't help but wonder this even still regarding the question. I had a stepmother who made me physically brand my brother with an iron and metal hanger when I was 11. I had a very abusive father who had brushed my teeth with Ajax. Crazy, yes. And to this day, I have so much guilt and shame for doing this to my brother, as the physical scars I caused him are still visible to this day. To think back over the years of my life, I grow increasingly anxious. I kept so much hidden for years. It is only recently that I speak of it just to free myself somehow. When most children were watching cartoons at 3 or 4, I watched my mother cut both wrists with razor blades, and the 3 of us had to clean it up. Unbelievable. What father could do this to his children? My brother suffered so much stress that he suffered constant nosebleeds. To punish him, my father made him rinse out his rags in the sink and forced him to drink the blood. David, you will never know the severity of daily abuse we suffered. I have many years of embarrassing stories and dare not share them all from just plain humiliation. Then and now I don't understand how it is that my father walked out of the courtroom free and I am still serving life. I asked why God for many years. I still do. It's just something I will battle forever. You would never believe the life the home kids lived. She was part of a group home. Before the days of social services. I knew I was different in that many of the other kids made fun of me and all of us kids. I am starting infusion treatments on Monday for Crohn's disease. Keep my 2 children and husband in your prayers. I am very nervous. Shortly after she wrote this email, her husband threw her through a glass coffee table, and they ended up getting a divorce. She's had a really rough life, and when you hear stories like that, you can't give a pat answer. You can't give a quick answer. You have to stop and just look someone in the eye and say, I'm sorry. What people really want is to know that you care and to know that God cares. They want to know that people love them. And that is so much more important than giving the right answer. So please, folks, I'm begging you, don't start with some kind of pat answer. Don't do it. Listen to the person's story. Love them where they are. The second thing I would say is the very question itself is actually a good question, and it proves that we bear the image of God. Let me explain. I had a Wicca student years ago in one of my Pima classes, and she asked this very question. I don't see how a good God could allow suffering. And I said to her, knowing she was Wiccan, hey, that's actually evidence that there's a good God, the fact that you would ask that question. She was so confused. So I explained it this way. Look, if we were just products of evolution, if we were just higher organisms that had evolved from one-celled organisms, if that's all we were, then we wouldn't ask this question. We would just accept that suffering is a part of existence, and we would just want to survive until tomorrow. And we would just care about survival. We wouldn't care about asking questions about fairness. That's a distinctly human question. Only humans ask questions like that. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, says this is actually proof of God's existence. If there was no God, we would fight like animals. We would just pull each other's hair and punch each other. But instead, even 2 kids who want the front seat of the car say, not fair, I called it first. Well, I called it when I saw it. You know, they're arguing with reasons. That's not how animals fight. Animals just bite each other. But people, even small people, argue using reason. The very fact that we argue like that is evidence we bear the image of a rational God. So the question itself is actually a rich question. Only those made in the image of a compassionate God would be deeply bothered in their souls when some people experience unfair pain. That's a God kind of question. In Romans 2:14-15, Paul says it this way, even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuses them or tells them they are doing right. The third thing I would say, and the way I answer this question is I always start it in a very humble way. I usually say something like, you know what, I don't know why God allows suffering, but here's what helps me. I do that for a couple of reasons. I don't want anyone to think that I have all the answers, because I don't. Secondly, I know that what helps me may or may not help that person. And I want to say it that way so that people understand that the spirit we have is more important than the answer. So I always begin with, I'm not sure why God allows suffering, but here's what helps me. And the first thing I say is that evil is a consequence of freedom. That's it. We can't have freedom without consequences. All freedom has consequences. And the freedom of choice means consequence automatically follows. Deuteronomy 30 verse 19 says it this way. God says, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. Choose life. We don't have to choose life. We can choose death. God's created this world in such a way there's no force field. You know, we might like it if there was a force field, and every time we wanted to make a bad choice, maybe hit somebody, God created a force field and protected that other person from getting hit. But after a while, we would realize there's a force field. I can't hit this person. God's not going to let me. And so we would eventually stop trying to hit the person, not because we don't want to hit the person, but because we know we can't. God hasn't arranged the world with force fields. God allows us to hit people, and when we do, it really does hurt. It hurts God, it hurts that person, and ultimately it hurts us. That's the way God has designed the universe. Choices are real, therefore consequences are real. They're not an illusion. You know, every bad thing in this world is the result of a choice, either my choice or someone else's choice. And in the case of natural disasters, the Bible says it's the consequence of Adam and Eve's choice, which led the world into the rebellion known as the fall, and all of the consequences of a fallen world. So the fall is a result of choice. That's one answer I give. But that doesn't help people, because when they hear that, it's still not fair, and they still think of the suffering of people they love. And they're like, why is God so indifferent? Why does he allow this? Sure, I can see that God has to allow consequences, but why that consequence? And why to that person? That's so unfair. I think one of the things we can say is that God is not indifferent to suffering because he suffered with us and for us. You know, the whole story of Jesus on the cross is that God became a human being and lived in this world among us, and that he actually chose to suffer and die in our place. God is not aloof to our suffering because he chose to suffer for us. In 1 Peter 2, verse 21, Peter writes this, "For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you." God is the suffering God. He knows what pain is like. So he's not somehow aloof. He's not somehow up there watching us going, wow, that must really be horrible. God knows what it feels like to suffer. You know, there was a little playlet written years ago called The Long Silence. It's really short, so I want to read it to you. It says this, "At the end of time, billions of people were scattered on a great plain before God's throne. Most shrank back from the brilliant light before them, but some groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with belligerence. 'Can God judge us? How could he know about suffering?' snapped a young brunette. She ripped open a sleeve to reveal a tattooed number from a Nazi concentration camp. 'We endured terror, beatings, torture, death.' In another group, a young man lowered his collar. 'What about this?' he demanded, showing an ugly rope burn. 'Lynched for no crime but being black.' In another crowd, a pregnant schoolgirl with sullen eyes. 'Why should I suffer?' she murmured. 'It wasn't even my fault.' Far out across the plain, there were hundreds of such groups. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering he permitted in his world. How lucky God was to live in heaven, where all was sweetness and light, where there was no weeping or fear, no hunger or hatred. What did God know of all that man had been forced to endure in this world? For God leads a pretty sheltered life,' they said. So each of these groups sent forth their leader, chosen because he had suffered the most. A Jew, a young black man, a person from Hiroshima, a horribly deformed arthritic, a deformed child. In the center of the plain, They consulted with each other. At last, they were ready to present their case. It was rather clever. Before God could be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what they had endured. Their decision was that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. Let him be born a Jew. Let the legitimacy of his birth be doubted. Give him work so difficult that even his family will think him out of his mind when he tries to do it. Let him be betrayed by his closest friends. Let him face false charges, be tried by a prejudiced jury, and convicted by a cowardly judge. Let him be tortured. At the last, let him see what it means to be terribly alone. Then let him die. Let him die so that there can be no doubt that he died. Let there be a great host of witnesses to verify it. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the throng of people assembled. And when the last had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence. No one uttered another word. No one moved. For suddenly all knew that God had already served his sentence. Another thing I often share with people is that God recycles evil and suffering to bring about good to those who love him. God recycles. He doesn't waste a hurt. He doesn't waste our pain. But even the pain that he allows for reasons we don't understand, he somehow turns it into something beautiful in the end. In Hebrews 12, we find these words. God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. God is doing something beautiful, and he uses our pain to weave a beautiful tapestry and to make something beautiful out of something truly evil. He does this with our character. God obviously uses pain to improve our character, and he clearly cares more about our character than our temporary happiness, because so much of the time we do suffer. But those of us who love Jesus, we grow through it. We actually become stronger and more like Jesus as a result. C.S. Lewis said it this way, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It plants the flag of truth within the fortress of a rebel soul. About the time I gave this talk the first time in our church, a friend of mine on Facebook sent me an email. Now, his name is Andy, and he was one of the popular guys back in my high school class. You know, he wasn't a religious guy at all. He was really popular. I had one class with him, and we sat next to each other and talked. But I was never in the in-group, and Andy always was. In fact, he was voted most likely to succeed at the end of our senior year. So Andy was someone I kind of looked up to in high school because I wanted to be popular like he was, but I never was. But then Andy ended up taking a very different road, and I didn't hear from him for a long time. We became friends on Facebook, and then he sent me this email. He said, David, I am glad to hear you are doing well. I am in Pensacola, Florida right now. My journey has been much different from yours. I graduated from Troy University with an accounting degree, lived in Dothan and Columbus, Georgia before moving to the Tampa Bay area. I lived there from 1996 to 2004. I was married and divorced during those years and have struggled with addiction for several years. My addiction finally led me to a short visit to prison from December 08 to July 08. I know it's hard to believe. I am currently in a Christian discipleship program here in Pensacola. God has been so good to me. He truly is restoring my soul. I was saved when I was 17 at First Baptist Church in Troy, but almost immediately lost my way. Maybe I just didn't realize what had happened or didn't take it seriously as I ought, but he took it seriously, and through unlikely circumstances has led me home. Know that adorable girl in the picture is my sister Libby's daughter, Brantley. Does your church have a website? By the way, sorry to hear you're still an Auburn fan. Roll Tide. Andy's journey was different, and it wasn't the journey we expected of the kid most likely to succeed. He ended up spending time in prison. But by his own admission, God used all of that and wove it together to bring him to a place of healing, a place of wholeness. All alone at that time in his life, not even with a wife or a kid, he was able to say it was worth the journey. Now, that's hard to do in the midst of the pain. When we're right in the middle of it, we can't possibly understand how God can bring anything good out of it. But he does. He uses pain to get our attention and to draw us to himself, and he does beautiful things in our lives. So that's what I tell people, is that as horrible as it is, God understands. And as horrible as it is, God's going to bring something beautiful out of what is evil and dark. I also encourage people that suffering is only temporary, and it doesn't compare with what's coming. You know, it's like a DVD. You know, you watch a Blu-ray or DVD and you get to this one point, this one scene, and my kids are like, let's skip this scene, Dad, let's skip this scene. I'm like, no, this is important. They're like, no, this is the terrible scene. I said, yeah, but nothing makes sense after this unless you see this scene. And they're like, no, this is terrible. Get to the good ending. And I'm like, the good ending makes no sense without this. You know, in the middle of that evil scene, you want to look away, turn away, fast forward. But in reality, it's just one moment. And what's coming is going to outshine what happened. That's what heaven, the kingdom of heaven, is all about. The good that's coming is so good, we will almost forget the short-lived evil and pain and suffering. In Romans 8:18, Paul says, what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. That's encouraging to me. That no matter how bad it gets, it doesn't compare with the good that's coming. In 2 Corinthians 4, Paul said this, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. You know, this young man who had fallen down some stairs when he was a little kid and broken his back in several places, lived in constant pain. He was always on medication. He was always having surgeries. And he had suffered something like 12 to 15 surgeries in just like a 4-year period. And this young man was in a wheelchair, still suffering incredible pain. And he stood before an audience and talked about the goodness of God. And so the interviewer said to him, after all you've been through, how can you talk about God being good? And the young boy, with the wisdom of the ages, said, God has all eternity to make it up to me. Now that's perspective. And that's one thing I share with people is no matter how bad this is or how long it lasts, it doesn't compare to what's coming. The best is yet to come. And finally, I like to share with people that God delays the end of evil and suffering because he loves us, not the other way around. In other words, people often say to me, why doesn't he just end it? You know, if God really is going to end it, if he's going to bring about this great kingdom of heaven, if God is going to erase our tears, if God's going to erase pain and death, why doesn't he do it now? And that's a great question. I heard Bill Maher ask that question on a documentary that he made, poking fun of religion. He said, then why doesn't he do it now? That's a great question, and the Bible actually answers that. In 2 Peter 3, verse 9, Peter says this, God isn't late with his promise, as some measure lateness. He is restraining himself on account of you, holding back the end because he doesn't want anyone lost. He's giving everyone space and time to change. Think of it this way. If God had ended everything 51 years ago, I wouldn't even be here today. If he had ended everything 47 years ago, he would have ended the world before I had an opportunity to come to know him. The reality is this. God delays the judgment because he wants more people to come to know him, fall in love with him, and experience the kingdom of heaven. God doesn't delay because he's some kind of sadist. God delays judgment because he's a compassionate God. One day, God will end all suffering and bring true justice. But before that day, he waits patiently for more of us to come home. Because God, though he allows evil and suffering, is ultimately a good and benevolent and compassionate creator who patiently waits for his children to come home so they can experience the love and the peace that he made them for.